you can be really smart and still be humbled by something, right?
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean you're not smart. It doesn't mean you're not an expert. It doesn't mean you're not capable. And a lot of the imposter syndrome is kind of delusional thinking in a way because it's like just by comparison, I'm no longer a capable person, and that's just not factually true in a lot of cases. And so it's important to confront the facts, but also how you feel about the facts.
Today, we're going to be talking with Cole Napper, who is a well-known figure, very public figure too, and well-respected figure in the people analytics space. He's also a vice president, people analytics, and chief evangelist. I still struggle to say that word for a startup called Ergonostics. I met Cole about a year ago now, probably longer than that. That's what it feels like. And he has been a wonderful mentor to me, a wonderful friend, and not just to me, but so many people in the space. And he's helped so many people grow in the people analytics space. I'm very excited to have him here. And yeah, let's get started. Welcome, Cole.
Well,
Thank you.
yeah, thank you for having me. Has it been a year, really? I
It
feel
has
like maybe it feels longer to you. It feels less than to me.
less. It feels like I've known
Yeah.
you for such a long time. That's a good thing.
Like if you had asked me, I would have said, "Oh yeah, we've probably been talking like 6 months, something like that."
6 months. I think it was the
Yeah.
beginning of the year. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe you might be right. I think it was the beginning of the year where I think you messaged me or I had connected with you to say like, oh, let's do a coffee chat. First thing that went into
Mm.
my head, I'm like, why do you want to talk to me? Why do you want to reach out to me? I don't think I have anything to offer, but okay. But
I'm always talking to people.
no,
I'm
and I love
always,
that.
always, always doing it.
Yeah, and I love that so much because I feel like you learn so much and you specifically have so much to share to people in this space, not just in this space, but like just overall. And I appreciate that you did reach out, and I'm very glad that we connected and met in
Yeah.
person, which was wonderful.
Well, yeah, that too. And we'll see if that's still true after this conversation's over.
That's going to be true. But before we dive
But I
in,
guess for your audience's sake, we've also recorded another podcast before, so
oh
this is
yeah, I
our
should have
second
mentioned that.
conversation.
This is our second actually third recorded conversation because I did a conversation with Orgnostic
Yeah, you
with
did.
you.
Was that the one on AI? What
Yes,
was
it
that one
was.
on? Okay, that
It
was a good
was
one.
somewhat on AI and I think other topics too, but I can't remember right now.
Yeah, must
It
have
was
not
fun.
been that memorable, you know?
The conversation was fun. I remember the other guests that I joined with too, but conversation was fun. And I love the people analytics, what is it called? Webinars that you guys host too. They're very
Hmm.
educational and informative. And you do a great job leading the conversation too.
Oh, just showering me with praise, making me
Of
feel
course.
uncomfortable. This is good.
I was gonna say making you feel better, but uncomfortable, that works too. But I would love to have you just talk a little bit about yourself as well, apart from my introduction, just and then we can dive in.
Yeah, just talk about yourself.
Please.
Well, so I have a background in IO psychology. I have a PhD in that. If you're not familiar, it's industrial organizational psychology. It's basically like bringing the science and psychology to the workplace, and really strong background in multivariate statistics, which led me kind of into the people analytics space, which is, what I do. I've practiced my whole career and now I work for a people analytics vendor. And, Sonali, you mentioned a lot of the sessions that I host, the community I lead called The Lounge, and then also the podcast that and newsletter that I have called Directionally Correct, which is a lot of fun. It's pretty popular, and yeah, and just like to give back to the community, even though I don't usually talk about it publicly.
Yeah. I was gonna say we're gonna be talking about it a lot this podcast because I have a lot of questions about you starting your newsletter along with your
Mm.
podcast and also working in a startup because from my understanding you started at a I'm gonna call them well-established company before starting to work with a startup. And I wanted to know about your journey into what made you want to pursue that path and what differences have you noticed?
Yeah, it's actually been a progression. Um, like if you charted out all the employers I'd worked for
Mhm.
by their headcount size, it's not a perfect linear line, but it's pretty close to a linear line from big companies to small companies.
Hmm.
And so I think the biggest company I work for maybe has a few 100,000 people. And now I work for a company that has like 30 people. And so it's gone down precipitously. But I would say if you're asking like when getting into startups, technically I got into startups before I worked at Orgnostic,
Hmm.
which was during the pandemic they were later stage. Again, that trend went down. So the
Yeah.
first one I went to had like 1,200 employees, and then the next one had like 200, and then I went down to 30. But those were both technically startups. And the reason why I did that, I mean, just transparently, is I was kind of burned out on corporate America. And I had kind of been through the grinding gears of what it takes to be successful. And I was looking for, a breather, a respite, a chance to kind of gain my footing again in terms
Hmm.
of, I'd always heard that startups, um, that they're like these fun places, but you work like crazy, but it's fun. Everybody's rowing in the same direction, but it's only for like the weirdos who live in San Francisco, right?
Yeah.
Well, what happened was during the pandemic, for the first time in history, startups started recruiting nationally.
Hmm.
And so I don't live in San Francisco, never wanted to live in San Francisco. It's actually too high of a cost of living place, in my opinion. And so
Yeah.
like there was no way I was ever going to go out there. So I was like, oh, it's just never going to happen. But I'd always kind of thought it'd be really cool to work in that environment because I think my personality would jive well with that type of environment. And I was right. But I've just been doing it virtually ever since. But I would say Orgnostic is what I would call like a real true startup that people
Hmm.
think about when they use that word. And it's wild.
It's wild
I
and fun.
well, it just is. It's the highs are high, the lowers are low.
Yeah.
Um, and like yeah, it's just like so many things can like make or break your company at any moment. And
That
like a
sounds
really good day can turn into a really bad day and vice versa, like at the snap of a fingers. And that never happens at a big company. I mean, you
yeah.
might have a bad day,
Hmm.
but the company's existence is not called into question just from one meeting
Yeah.
to the next, which
Yeah.
does happen in startups, and it's kind of wild.
That sounds very scary. And honestly, that was going to be one of my questions to ask you is a lot of people hesitate, including myself. I would hesitate to go into a startup because of that reason. It's like it could go south any moment, anything, and it could even just go in the right direction very quickly too. It's mostly like people to think about, at least for me, what could go
Yeah.
wrong versus what could go right. And was that something that you had considered before even joining any startup?
I don't think I mean, I think I recognize kind of the romantic, like it being romanticized in my mind before
Mm,
I had been here, but I hadn't really thought about it critically, if I'm being honest with
mm,
myself. I only started to think about it critically once I was in the environment.
yeah.
And two things that stand out for me that I think I knew kind of unconsciously, but like these two quotes really kind of stand out to me now is being a part of my identity almost is
Mm,
like nothing ventured, nothing gained. So one of the things I realized that I have a much higher risk tolerance than most people. And that's just kind of my baseline factory settings. And so that worked. But the other was, and I probably told you this before too, is I learned this from my first boss at the first startup I worked at. He said, you always have to bet on yourself first.
mm,
And that has always been sort of a life philosophy of mine, but I didn't ever put it into words. And I never really thought about it in that way. It's like, if you have a high risk tolerance and the future outcomes are truly uncertain, then you actually, in a lot of ways, more so than working at a big company, you control your destiny. And if you control your destiny, then you have to bet on yourself first. If risk is going to be taken, you need to be the one betting on the risk on yourself rather than kind of like letting the environment happen to you. And I've gained a lot of passion and perspective from betting on myself first.
I was gonna say, I think that kind of philosophy also kind of pushes you to be a little bit more confident in yourself too, because it's kind of hard to bet on yourself if you don't really feel confident in your ability to do the work. And I'm not sure if that's something you've struggled with, especially when you started out in your career.
I kind of have a riff on this that's related, which is
Hmm.
I just don't believe in imposter syndrome, and it is real. I just
Uh-huh.
I some people believe it's like incurable, and I think
Hmm.
that that's wrong.
Okay.
And the reason why I know it's wrong is because if you've ever done something so many times, even though you were nervous that you've gotten bored by it, you no longer have imposter syndrome, right? And so,
Okay.
like, if you feel like the example that's always used in my space is like statistics. Everybody's afraid of statistics. They don't feel like they know it well enough. If you get to the point where you've run the same type of analysis so many times that you're bored by it, you are no longer an imposter.
Hmm.
Like you may have felt it at one point, but
Yeah.
you are now, you may be an expert or on a pathway to becoming an expert, right? And so like that's the thing I would say is just getting repetitions is really important. So the first time you bet on yourself, yeah, it's terrifying,
Yeah.
right? But the
Yep.
100th time you do it,
Yeah.
it's still terrifying, but you kind of are used to it. I would always say like, I don't know where I came across this, but it's from exposure therapy and psychology. Like if somebody's afraid of elevators,
Yeah.
you they don't actually lose their fear of elevators. They just become braver as you
Hmm.
expose them to it. So like the repetitions just give you the exposure and
Yeah.
you don't lose the fear. You may not feel, you may still feel like an imposter, but you're just used to it and you became braver and you had more courage in your life, which I think is important.
About this before in the previous podcast too, because this does ring a bell. I'm like, oh yeah, I remember you talking about it. And it sounds like it's more of like just facing your fear versus just sitting on it and saying you're not capable of getting it done. And even though you're going to be fearful, it's you still have to
Yeah.
take action if that's something you want in your life
When
or
I
in
may
your
have mentioned
career.
this before, but one quote that I find very motivating and has helped me, and this again happened in the last few years, so this isn't like something I had my whole career,
Hmm.
was what's going to call out the best in you? Directly challenging the thing that's challenging you the most, right? Right. And so what that basically means is face your fears,
Yeah.
you know?
Is it,
And
is it
that,
your
but
fault?
it's by facing your fears that's going to call out the best in you. So
Hmm.
it's not like you're just going to have faced your fears. You're going to be a better person as a consequence.
Said this because 10 minutes before this recording, these are the things that were going in my head. I'm like, it's okay. I'm feeling uncomfortable. It's okay. It's going to push me to be, be better in what I'm
Yeah.
doing and just to become a better interviewer too, or a podcast host. So I could definitely see that. And I definitely remember having this conversation with you before too. And it's,
Yeah.
yeah,
Well,
I
actually, I've
go
been
look at that
digging
quote.
this. And I don't know if you're okay with just going on a tangent, but it's your
Yeah,
podcast. But
go for it.
I've been digging into this week. I don't know how I went down this rabbit hole on YouTube of Carl Jung's The Shadow. Are you familiar with this?
It's familiar, but I can't remember it.
So Jung is probably the most second famous psychologist behind Freud.
Hmm.
But when by the time I started studying psychology, both Freud and Jung were considered like bunk, like nobody to study them. And so like, and I didn't know any better. I'd never read them, so I just believed
Yeah,
people. It's like, oh, those are stupid people. I didn't know any. But
yeah,
there's a lot of wisdom, and they do have some wild ideas about certain things. But there are
yeah.
certain things that are still considered like bedrock psychological phenomena.
Hmm.
And one of the things that Jung did, kind of, I don't know, I guess, deduced was this concept called the shadow, which is the part of your personality and your unconscious that you're not willing to acknowledge. And so think about like all of your angers, all of your fears, all
Hmm.
the things that basically breed resentment. So if you ever feel the emotion of resentment, essentially what Jung would say is that you're not mad at somebody else, you're mad at yourself. And you're mad at the thing that you would refuse to acknowledge about but you can't acknowledge it because it's unconscious. And so I've been thinking about this a lot lately about like, what are the things that I'm resentful for and what I should be doing differently to kind of face my fears in the sense because the only thing that you can do to cure the unconscious is to bring it into the conscious realm. Right. And so I've been trying to be like do a little soul searching and honestly, it's uncomfortable. I mean, you figure out some things like you tell yourself, or I tell myself this narrative of, yeah, I'm a good person and I'm brave and I try real
Yeah,
hard. And
yeah,
then you look at it and you're like, oh, I'm a weenie. No, I really, and I should be doing more.
Mm.
And yeah, it's just uncomfortable, and I wish it wasn't that way, but I'm definitely going to be focusing on trying to fix it and be braver.
Is that something you face often? Or was that just an example of saying, oh, I'm not enough or I'm not doing enough?
I would say if like if I did real like soul searching and I went back to the things that I still feel resentful in my life,
Hmm.
there's some things that I have not let go of, right?
Yeah,
And um it's but I've kind of like as many people do built like this protective shell around it of like, oh, it's just somebody else's fault.
yeah.
When really, I mean, there are probably aspects that are other people's fault, but how did I react? And was
Mm.
I, again, because like in your mind, what the shadow really comes from is you being a baby. I don't mean that in like the derogatory sense. It's like at one point we were all small, vulnerable creatures that needed protection. And part of moving into adulthood is learning to protect yourself. But we all still have this in our mind. And it's like, how can we conquer that? How can we truly grow and mature and become comfortable in our own skin? And that's what I'm trying to do.
I have so much to learn because I have to go Google afterwards, both of these individuals to learn more about it because I'm going to be going down the rabbit hole too after. But now I appreciate the tangent because I think that was really useful to listen to and it's making me reflect on a lot of things that I know that I'm very resentful for and still learning how to get over it.
Yeah.
And I don't know where I mentioned this, and I think it was the last podcast that I recorded. It was more of like I can't continue my life and we can't continue our life by blaming other people. Even like you said, some aspects
Oh,
might
we
be their
can. We
fault.
absolutely can. And that's
In
that's the
order
beauty.
to grow, that's not
Yeah.
really going to help you. Or at least that's not helping me, is blaming other people for anything that I might be, dealing with. It's more of like me taking ownership of the part that I could have reacted differently or I could have taken a different path, but just learning and not really blaming myself for it or
Yeah.
others. That was a good tangent. But
Well,
now
there's
I'm gonna
another
bring
quote kind of related to it, which is it's better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war. Like it's better to be a well-adjusted person who has
Mhm.
kind of their anger and their like they recognize their anger, they recognize all of the good and the evil things that they're capable of, but they keep it in check, than a
Mm.
person who is not well adjusted, who's just again kind of kicking the can down the road like you were mentioning of like, oh, it's everybody else's fault, it's not my fault.
Yeah.
Then and then hard times hit you and you're not prepared.
Yeah. It's like I'm gonna go on a tangent now.
Good.
I was gonna say like probably this year or maybe a year and a half. And looking back at it, I've met so many people, and it's been a consistent reminder that life is not a fairy tale and not everything's perfect. In my head, I remember when I first brought up this topic, I don't remember who I was talking to, but it was more of like there's going to be one point in your life where everything's just going to be perfect and everything's going to be beautiful, sunshine and rainbows. And apparently that's not a thing. In my head, I'm still
Yeah.
trying to accept that it's not a thing and that things will go wrong. And you just gotta adapt to when things do go wrong because eventually it'll go better.
I remember kind of feeling that way. I went to this really like progressive elementary school, and it was like one of these places. It's called a magnet school. I'm not sure if they have them everywhere, but it was like kind of a experimental concept, and they really heavily invested. It was a lot of inner city kids too, like so it was a and it was considered a wild success because it was one of the few places that showed that like inner city kids could have high test scores.
Hmm.
And it was like a beautiful, beautiful thing. I remember being a part of it, but it was sort of like a fairy tale. And then I went into junior high, and man, it was like two things collided at once. One was just like puberty, which is its own issue. But the other was like the real world smacking me across the face. And I really struggled to adjust to that because I assumed the whole world was like this fairy tale.
Yeah.
that I was a part of. And you could even make an argument. I'm still adjusting to it to this day because I still kind of, from an idealistic perspective, think
Hmm.
things should be more like they were when I was young, you know,
Yeah.
and they
Yeah.
weren't, or they're not.
I can't remember what the topic of this discussion was that I'm about to share. It was more of like accepting, finding a balance between being hopeful and being realistic. And I feel like just being delusional, that they say, being delusional kind of keeps up the hope and kind of keeps you going. Versus if you're just being realistic in every aspect of your life, it's just, I personally feel like that's draining. So why not just be a
Yeah.
little delusional?
See, I,
Sparkle.
I kind of believe in like harmony and balance,
Mm,
meaning I need to have a room in my mind palace for being completely irrational and delusional and having completely unrealistic expectations
mm,
because that's going to push me to do better. It's going to make me dream. It's going to make me strive. It's going to make me driven. Right. But I also need to have a room in my mind that says we got to get down to business. We've got to execute. We've got to be practical. We've got to be realistic. And we're never going to get to those high, lofty goals if we don't figure out some ways of getting boots on the ground and making it happen. And
strategy behind
both
it.
are both are really important.
Yeah, the strategy and the dreams,
Or the execution, yeah, the
the
strategy and the
execution.
execution.
Yeah. But before the tangent, I remember, and I wanted to ask you more follow-up questions on this, was
Sure.
about the imposter syndrome, right? I know you mentioned it's not a thing, but a lot of
The
us,
thing, I
common,
mean,
a lot of common people do struggle with it, including myself.
I know a lot of really talented people who struggle with it, and
Yeah.
I mean, I still, if you put me in a room with like my quote unquote peers, I'll still feel like, oh crap, like, am I supposed to be here?
Yeah.
Like, but it's one of those things where, well, like, let me tell you, I think this is a good kind of summary of what I mean. Is I have this theory that like most people by like the second grade figure out that they're not like a genius. And so they just get accustomed to like knowing that somebody else is smarter than them. And then it becomes a not they're not worried about it. It doesn't hurt their ego. They're like, oh yeah, there's plenty of people out in this world that are smarter than me. And they become adjusted to it, right? But there's a problem is really smart people is, you might grow up in school and might be the smartest kid in your school your whole life.
Yeah.
And so this common occurrence that happens in PhD programs where you enter a PhD program and for the first time in your life, you find out that not only you're not the smartest, but you're likely average and there's likely people that are there that are smarter than you.
Hmm.
And some people generously I'd say it humbles them and ungenerously I'd say they crumble
Hmm.
behind it. And it's because they don't have what happens to every second grader, which is they realize they can't they can't cope with the fact that they're no longer the smartest person,
Hmm.
right? And definitely I wouldn't say I necessarily fall into that camp because I did know smarter people than me, but I w- I mean I was probably the dumbest person in my PhD program, and
I doubt that.
and it is very humbling for sure.
Hmm.
And I think but how that relates to the imposter syndrome is you can be really smart and still be humbled by something, right?
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean you're not smart. It doesn't mean you're not an expert. It doesn't mean you're not capable. And a lot of the imposter syndrome is kind of delusional thinking in a way because it's like just by comparison, I'm no longer a capable person, and that's just not factually true in a lot of cases. And so it's important to confront the facts, but also how you feel about the facts.
It sounds like I'm hearing two main things that are sticking out to me. One,
Mm-hmm.
going back to the comparison thing, because you automatically lose credibility. Because if I'm sitting in a room with you, I'm comparing my experiences with you, right? Obviously, you have more experience in this space than I do, because I still consider myself a newbie, and I am a newbie, right? And I'm not
Yeah.
afraid to admit it. And you've been in this space way longer than I have. You have way more experience than I do. And me sitting here and comparing my experiences to you, I'm obviously going to feel like an imposter sitting in that room. But
Yeah, but
so I
that's
guess
again,
taking,
let's talk about it factually. I'm
yeah,
just older than you,
yeah,
all right? If I started comparing myself to somebody who's like 55 years old, who's been a leader in this space, obviously they know more than I do. And
yeah,
I shouldn't feel bad about that. Like I
yeah.
think it's about the should aspect. It's like how should I feel? Well, it's like should I feel like I'm nothing? No. I
Hmm,
still know things. They just know
yeah,
more, right? I actually have a riff on this that's sort of funny. I don't know if you'll find it
yeah.
funny. But one of the things that you find is a lot of the smartest people on earth are really afraid of AI right now. And I have a feeling it's like the PhD phenomena where they still have made it through their whole life and have never found somebody who's smarter than them. And for the first time, there's a technology that actually is smarter than them and they can't cope. And so now they're crumbling. They're like saying, we got to shut down all of AI because of my ego.
That was going to be my second point, is imposter syndrome mostly coming because we can't let our ego be hurt. And we're having a hard time admitting that there might be someone who's better than us or
Yeah.
something that's better than us.
And that's why we all have to go back to the second grade,
Yeah.
you know?
Let go of the ego
Yep.
and just accept it. It's not like you're accepting it, not doing anything about it. Accept it. And if that's something you want to learn, grow in it.
Absolutely.
So is AI going to take over the world? Or at least this function?
I think it's going to be the iterative process. I mean, I heard Sam Altman, who's the CEO of OpenAI,
Hmm.
on a talk the other day, and he said that he didn't believe in like industrial, like the different kind of technological revolutions that have happened in the past. He just sees it as one long continuum of technological progress, and the slope of that progress can change. It can go up and it can go down. But this might just be speeding up that slope, which means that rather than it being like a light switch moment where it's like we all have jobs and we all lose our jobs all at once, it's more of a continuum of maybe aspects of your job go away or maybe certain jobs go away. But I don't see it. And honestly, I use it a lot. I've worked around with it. My company is built. Yeah, like it's good. It's not that good, you know.
Yeah.
Like if
It's
it can
more
do what
like
I
a,
do already, then maybe I don't deserve to be doing what I'm doing because it's not that good.
mm. So maybe you find, a better opportunity or a better thing to do at your role.
Well, I'll tell you that I'll actually play the other side of the equation too here for a second and just say because
Hmm.
I mean I'm a human being too and I am also worried about like existential risk and those type of things.
Hmm.
One of the reasons why we I don't know if we consciously did this or not, but I have noticed the change in our podcast is it used to be a lot more informative and now it's a lot more entertainment focused. And
Yeah.
then one of the things I realized is generative AI is really good at information.
Hmm.
So, like, I have this theory that at one point, probably not in the distant future, a lot of college is going to go away, and it's just going to be like an AI bot training you, and it might be customized to exactly your needs. And it's because it's probably going to be better than any teacher that's ever existed, right? And so, if you're playing the game of, hey, I've got to be better than every teacher that's ever existed to give information better than an AI, that's a losing game.
Yeah.
But one of the things that human beings really value, and we probably don't even acknowledge how much we value it, but is not the same game as entertainment, right? So, like, just listening to somebody interesting, or like I listen to a lot of stand up comedy. Why is stand up comedy interesting? Like, I don't know, but I like
It's
it.
entertaining.
It's entertaining. And
Yeah.
so our podcast, I would say, if you like had like a natural language processing algorithm, analyze like the sophistication of it or like the IQ of the podcast, it was probably higher back when we had less listeners. And I would say
Hmm.
our IQ of the podcast has gone way down, but it's way more entertaining and our listenership has gone up. And
Yeah.
so like that in my mind is how you kind of compete in the world of AI is do the things that
Yeah, I
you
can't.
do well, but it doesn't do well.
Hmm. Which is one aspect being entertainment. And I think I've heard this discussion just across the board, mostly on LinkedIn, just read about it, is AI technically can't really, not yet anyway, can't replace the human component that goes into your role or when it comes to dealing with
I mean, it's
stakeholders.
not a human. It can do human
Exactly.
things.
But it can't, the emotional aspect? I don't really think
I
it
mean,
can
do you
replace
want an
that.
emotional AI?
I don't. That's what I'm saying.
Mean, they can make it right, like sarcasm and, humor and all
Songs.
that stuff. It's not that good,
Yeah.
but I mean, my understanding is it's actually way better at creative tasks than we would like it to be. It's already making really high quality music. I wouldn't be surprised if there was this big strike in Hollywood. One of the key sticking points of it was using AI to make movies and not needing writers and actors
Mm,
anymore, right?
wow.
And so like creative tasks are not, beholden to just humanity. Um, but I think it's important that we realize it's like it kind of goes back to like one of the things that frustrates me is when I go into a store and they've replaced a checkout with a self checkout, right? I don't mind that self checkouts exist. I actually like giving people the option, but I don't like it when they force you to use self checkout. And it's like they're putting somebody out of there like that could have been somebody's job. I like good customer service. You could have
Yeah.
somebody there and they're doing a fantastic job. And sometimes there's more complicated tasks that require a human being that this little thing. Now, basically, are you going to start paying me an hourly rate to check my stuff out? Because in my opinion, that's somebody's job. Now I have to do their job to go to the store. This is bullshit, right?
Yeah.
Um, sorry, I'm getting kind of
That's
amped up
actually
about
funny.
this.
No, that was
No,
funny.
but yeah, but my point is, it's like, why do we want to live in a world where we never interact with another human being? I don't want to live in that world. I like
I,
humans.
yeah.
Humans frustrate me. They're the greatest point of my satisfaction and the source of my biggest frustrations. Right? But I still want to interact with humans. I don't want my whole life to be a self-checkout machine.
That was a very strong statement, and I would agree with you. And now I'm just remembering like how social media has impacted how much we actually interact with people, even though it makes it better because like right now we're able to interact virtually, but just being on social media, I feel like it takes away that human component that you could be having by just going outside. And I don't think I want to
Yeah.
live in that world where that doesn't exist. I like human beings too. Yes, they do frustrate me as well. But it's worth it. It's worth experiencing all those emotions that just learning how to ground yourself afterwards. That helps.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I know, wow, a lot of tangents and I love all of them. And
Let's keep going. Let's
I
do
want to
some more.
bring it back. I want to bring it back to your podcast actually and your newsletter. And maybe we can go on a different tangent afterwards.
Sure.
Uh
Or during.
and during that too, that works too. And this may be a conversation that you and I had, or something that you just had talked about on your own podcast, because I do listen to that because it is entertaining. I,
Thank you. Low IQ, high entertainment.
yes, I was going to ask you, what made you want to get started?
Um, I mean, there's like two levels to it. It's kind of like the startup question you asked me earlier. Like there was like an unconscious level, or
Yeah,
maybe unconscious probably not the right word. It's just like not highly critical way of thinking about it, which was like, oh yeah, I listen to other people's podcasts. I should have a podcast, right?
yeah,
But I hadn't really like done any of the math of like what it would take to actually do that, and that
yeah.
was just a thought,
Hmm.
right? But then there was the practical part of it, which was I had started writing articles and was starting to get some notoriety. And I'll kind of actually come back to that in a second because I think it's sort of related to what you're curious about. Um, and I started getting some notoriety, and I got invited to be on somebody else's podcast. And then my now co-host, his name's Scott, he listened to that and reached out to me, and he's like, "We should start a podcast." And I was like, "Great," because I've been thinking about wanting a podcast forever, but
Yeah.
I didn't want to. Like he did all the back end stuff and I did all the front end stuff. And he's like, well,
Hmm.
I don't want to do the front end stuff. And I was like, good, because I don't want to do the back end stuff. I was like,
Yeah.
whoa, this is perfect. Right. And so it was just kind of a serendipitous thing that happened. And then we just went from there. We started recording episodes, just me and him. We
Hmm.
recorded five, like we kind of made ourselves like a few promises to each other. Like we will quit doing this if it ever becomes not fun. We also are like, we'll record five of these things. And if like there's no take. We're just gonna throw them away, and this isn't gonna be a thing, all right?
Yeah.
And so if you notice, our first three podcasts are just me and him talking to each other.
Yeah.
Well, that means that there was two podcasts before that that were just atrocious.
You're like, this is not
We're
going
like,
on in
oh,
public.
we gotta get rid of this. This is so
That's funny.
bad. And the reason why is because the second, I don't know if everybody experiences this, but I did, and he did too. Is like the second you hit that record button, it's like you turn into a radio host. Like, hey, it's good to see you today, Sonali. What's going on? And it's like this is
That sounds
not
funny.
what is going on. What happened?
Yeah.
And you gotta be real. Or that was like one of the things we wanted. We wanted to be highly
Mm,
authentic and fun, and you can't do that if you're just a radio host. But the thing I want to say was actually the bigger transition from starting the podcast was actually writing the articles. Like, I
mm.
mean, I have messages I was sending to people who I kind of look up to. I was such a weenie. Like, I was so pathetic. I was like, what if people are going to be mean to me? What if I write this article and like people say I'm stupid? And like, it was such like, oh my God, it's embarrassing. But
Yeah.
putting yourself out there again, like betting on yourself. I literally made a New Year's resolution in 2022. Is it
Too.
20? Yeah, 2022. I was going to write an article, and that was like my one for the year.
Yeah.
You can write an article in an afternoon,
Yeah. You just
but
wanted to write one in 1 year. That's what you're saying?
I wanted to publish it,
I see.
and that was the thing that I was afraid of. And again, kind of going back to the quote from earlier, what's going to call out the best in you? Directly challenging the thing that's challenging you the most. The thing that was challenging the most was fear. And just like, am I the kind of person who people are going to respect? And frankly, the internet's a really mean place in some ways,
It is. Yeah. Yeah.
And there's a reason why I'm not on social media. I haven't been on social media since like probably like 4 years ago.
Wow.
Other than if you consider LinkedIn social media. But and it's because people are mean, people are judgmental, people like all the things that I like was stepping away from over the years. Like I don't like these aspects of humanity. I'm just
Mm,
gonna remove myself from the chessboard. And so I was like saying I consciously have to confront the fact that I'm scared of putting myself back out there.
mm.
And the result was an overwhelming like wave of positivity, which was super nice and unexpected. And I do get like like some people sometimes like, yeah, that's stupid, but I don't really care anymore. Because
Yeah.
that's the thing again about imposter syndrome and repetitions is like once you've written the 40th article or you've done the, 50th
Yeah.
podcast, you're not like a beginner anymore.
Yeah. It's more of like I wasn't sure if we were gonna add something afterwards because it's I was gonna tie it back to the quote that you said too. It's more about repetition. And once you keep doing it, the
Mhm.
outside opinions, they don't really phase you as much as they would when you just start out.
That's what I got.
Even when you I know you said one of the biggest things that you struggled with was the fear that held you back of like, oh, what if people are mean or what if no one likes it, no one listens, but so on and so forth, right? When you hit publish on that first article, do you remember how that made you feel? Or what went
It
through your
was,
head?
I mean, it was like, I don't know if you call it like riding a roller coaster. I don't know if there's a
Mm.
good comparison, but it was like adrenaline, but not like adrenaline from jumping out of an airplane or something like that. It was like fear mixed with, excitement mixed with like what like just the unknown, right?
Yeah.
And I do remember it. And the funny thing is that one actually blew up. It might be the most popular thing I've ever written. It was the first one.
Wow.
Um, And I realize some of that has to do with like LinkedIn's algorithm, which is kind of baloney. That's a whole nother conversation. But
Which
because
we can
they
go into.
one thing, if you want to game LinkedIn's algorithm, go publish your first article. They will give it so much love, right?
Okay. Yeah.
And they'll actually like give you less love than more articles you publish. And so their algorithm games you to try to get you hooked
Mm,
on writing articles, which it worked. Well done, LinkedIn. You know,
thanks.
but yeah, like it was thrilling for sure. And what was really cool is like people who I hadn't heard from in years, commenting or liking it. I was like, oh my gosh, like you know me, you see me, you respect me. Like this is cool.
So step one for me is to write a new article right after this call, maybe about this conversation.
Well, there's another part about writing too. I was actually telling somebody this yesterday. Um, like if you're like a technical expert or on a particular
Hmm.
topic, is like if you want to say something, like I had always had these thoughts. So I've been practicing people analytics for a while,
Hmm.
but I didn't have a voice in the community, or I didn't have the amount of voice that I thought I wanted, right?
Hmm.
And so I use this expression, I was killing in obscurity. Nobody knew who I was, but I was doing a really good job. And it didn't feel good because I was like, if I'm doing such a good job, I feel like more people should know who I am. And I
Yeah.
have all these thoughts and nobody knows about these thoughts. And so when I say them publicly, people are like, oh, where'd you get that idea from? It's like, it's my idea, like it's from me.
Yes.
And and so one of the things that is really cathartic is like now, like I'll have ideas, but I'm like, I don't feel like sharing this with anybody. Just write it down and then not
Mm.
share it. It's a very cathartic experience, right?
Yeah.
Like it's not so much like again about getting external validation. I'm trying more and more to get validation for myself. I'm not perfect at it, and come a long way, but I still have a long way to go. Um, but it's
Yeah.
like the practice of knowing like this is what I'm capable of, and I do have something to share, even if nobody ever sees it. I have something to share.
So the repetition isn't necessarily to gain validation externally. It's more of gaining that validation internally. And then whatever you feel like publishing, that's what you publish, versus you're doing it to gain more
Well,
credibility.
and let's be clear about this. There's like sometimes people poo poo on things like getting external validation just because like, oh, that means like you're psychologically weak.
Yeah.
And you might be, but there's also perks to being well known, right? Like these like tangible
Yeah.
benefits. Like if you want to, be known as an expert in a space and make more money and be able to speak at conferences, like that's a goal of yours. You don't just need the external validation, you need the external awareness. Like people need to know who you are, right? I mean, there's a
Yep.
reason. I'm sure like there's people standing on the street corner right now that have a sign that are like, the world thinks they're a crazy person just because they're standing on a street corner. And probably most of them are crazy people, but I bet you a few of them are just quiet geniuses who are brilliant and we just don't know the difference, right?
Yeah. And that's why, like, I think one of the things that I've learned, especially being on LinkedIn, and I don't post as often as I used to, it's
Mm-hmm.
the power of building a brand for yourself, having that
Mm-hmm.
personal brand. So when you speak, people listen because you build that credibility in the public eye, not just in your own eye.
Yeah.
Though that is a
I mean, I
scary
made a goal
experience
for
too.
myself. I actually haven't shared this publicly.
Yeah.
Um, I don't even know if I want to share it, but I will anyway. I said I have this, and Scott and I have talked about it on the podcast a bunch, like my disdain for the interview process. Um, but one of my goals, I never want to apply for a job again. I'm tired of it. I'm done with it. I've eaten
Yep.
so much shit in my life and received so much rejection from this, like levels that people were like, "Oh, Cole, you're successful. It must have been like you must have been eating out of a silver spoon the whole time." Like, no, I've probably eaten more shit than the next 10 people combined,
Yeah.
right? To get to the point where I am, because I didn't start out like on third base waiting to go to home plate. I didn't, and yeah, it requires a lot of work. And so, guess what? Getting notoriety can help. And I don't want to ever interview for another job again. And so, hopefully, this will allow me not to do that, or like not apply for another job. You have to interview for every job you get, but like,
That's true.
yeah.
Which is a tedious process on its own too, and the application process. And I don't think it ever, I hope it does. I'm hopeful that the application process gets better, but I know a lot of jobs, people who are currently job seeking, they, it's awful. It's just awful. I cannot think of a different word to describe it. And
Well,
a
it's
lot of
not
people do
just that it's
use,
awful. It's 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 ineffective, right? So kind of going back to what I was saying earlier about like killing in obscurity is I have a real big issue. So one of the things that you learn in IO psychology is about selection. So people who study IO psychology know more about like how to effectively select people than most
hmm,
HR professionals, and how to do it scientifically and how to validate it, how to make it legally defensible.
hmm,
And one of the things that you study is this concept of like false positives and false negatives. They're called type 1 and type 2 error. And almost all of the focus is put on type 1 error, which is false positives, meaning someone who got the job who didn't perform effectively. So idea a true positive is you select a person and they do well on the job, right?
Okay.
A true negative is you don't select a person and they would have been horrible, right? And so like a false positive is you do select them, but they do horrible, right? And so you're trying to like most of what the focus goes to is trying to minimize the number of false positives.
Hmm.
And that is important. And I'm not disagreeing with its importance. But false negatives get almost no love, which is who are the people who would have fucking killed it, who we didn't even consider, right? And that's what drives me nuts. And it's kind of like the counterfactual because I feel like I've been a false negative, and a lot of people who are talented, who I know, have been false negatives in their career. And there's a lot of people out there that I'll call like, false positives who get a lot of love out there,
Yeah.
right? And it's
Hmm.
because of things that I have disdain for, which is like overly focused on credentialism or where you're from or what your accent is or how much money you have, like all the stuff that
Yeah.
should not matter but does matter.
Yes.
Well, guess what? That's creating a world where there's a lot of false negatives out there that shouldn't be.
So how do we as individuals, one thing I hear to counter that is to build that personal brand, is to
Yeah,
another advice that I usually get or and give is network. Grow your network, meet people, because
sure.
that's the best way you're going to get in rooms that you usually won't because you don't have those false
Yeah, life's
credentials.
not fair, but if I at least understand the levers of the equation, I can try to
Hmm.
balance it in my favor as much as I can humanly possibly do that. One
Yeah,
of the ways of doing
exactly.
that is like, well, if I'm killing an obscurity, I need to change the obscurity. I need to no longer be obscure. Well, if I'm going to do that, then I need to be brave and I need to put myself out there. Well, if I'm going to do that, I need to quit being a weenie, right? And so it all comes back to me.
That I need to face my fears and
Mhm.
do more repetition and hopefully get over it. Even if I don't get over it, I will just get better at facing it over time.
Yep.
I wanted to ask a little bit more about your journey into developing your newsletter and your podcast. What's been the most challenging component for you, and what are some key lessons that you've learned along the way?
I mean, like the stuff I talked about earlier was probably the most
Hmm.
challenging if I'm honest with myself, but there were other like things that are challenging. Like I don't know. I never been wanted to be one of those guys that had his own website, and like, what I mean by that is like literally like the upkeep of running a website. Like, and so I done, yeah, it took a long time to find the research. Like, and I used to publish things on LinkedIn and then I did it on Medium and now I do it on Substack. Well, that was all because of the evolution of just like getting the right technology to do what I wanted it to do for the least amount of work because I do not get enjoyment out of that. And I know that about myself. Right. And
Yeah,
everybody said, oh, yeah, you should start your own website. So I did months and months of research on like getting a WordPress and all these. I still get advertisements from the companies who are like trying to get me to build a website. I'm like, I just don't want to deal with that. I want to do the minimum
yeah,
amount of work to get the maximum amount of input or,
yeah,
or payback. And yeah, that's been a continual thing, and I could be doing so much more. Like I could
yeah,
be like for the podcast, I could be doing so much more promotions. I see people making like TikTok clips and YouTube reels and all this kind of stuff. I was like, I just don't feel like
you
doing
don't
all
want
this
to do
stuff.
that.
Well, it's not only that; it's almost on principle. Like I don't want to be known for being a 7-second clip. Like I would rather select people out of my audience than into my audience, right? Like if you want to listen to my podcast, you got to be about what we're about.
Okay.
We said when we started, we were looking for our tribe, and I
Hmm.
now have kind of reframed that. I call it throwing up the bat signal, right? Sometimes you throw up the bat signal and Batman comes. Like you throw up a signal to the
Yeah,
world, and then cool people who agree with you, who see things the way that you see, they find you instead of you finding them. You
it's more of
know?
like tailoring your work based on what you want to put out in the world
Yeah.
versus tailoring it to please people that you
And
don't even
so
know.
whoever is the person who needs a 7-second clip, they're not Batman. I don't need them to come find me. All right.
Yeah, you're looking for the best and best Batman.
Because again, I'm not trying to be social media famous. I don't even do
Yeah,
social media. Right. There's
yeah.
a reason. It's not an accident. It's not like I'm not capable of it.
Hmm.
Um, It's like
Do you
some things I just fundamentally disagree with.
follow-up question? It's mostly just for my personal gain.
Hmm.
How do you balance not liking social media versus producing on social media? Because I even
I
though
mean,
you
it
don't put
depends on if you
LinkedIn,
consider LinkedIn to be social media, because that's the only place I post.
that's
Right.
what I was gonna say. Considering LinkedIn would fall under social media, how do you balance that? Because it's technically you are putting your stuff out there. It is
Yeah.
getting you recognized across the board, and you do become somewhat of a public figure.
Well, I think you have to diagnose what I dislike about social media. So there's even things that I'm starting to dislike about LinkedIn, and I call it like the Facebookization of LinkedIn, where their algorithm has changed over time. So it used to
Yeah,
be, I would call it like post and pray or whatever you would call it. Like
post and
I
pray.
literally would create a hyperlink to my articles and then just post it on there, and people could read the articles that they like. It wasn't all about like the number of likes that you got, the number of
Mm,
comments, the number of reposts, how is that going to be boosted or de-amplified by the algorithm? What time did you post it? Like all this bullshit you have to deal with. And it's like,
yeah,
I hate all that stuff.
yeah,
But the thing I hate the most, and I've had to try to find like happy mediums with this because you really do get penalized by LinkedIn if you don't do it, is like people posting like my top 10 thoughts about how to do this better. And like all that
yeah,
stuff is just, first of all, they get, ChatGPT to write all of it for them. And so it's not original content. There's no critical
mm,
thinking in it. But second of all, the algorithm loves that shit. And I don't know why. And so it's making us all dumber. And so I'm of the mind that LinkedIn has actually sacrificed their long term for their short term, because they used to have a platform that was engaged in getting you like, if you're signing up for LinkedIn, you're looking for like a 30-year relationship with the company because they become your walking resume. That's what LinkedIn used to be about.
yeah,
Now it's about like, did we juice our daily active users in the last day,
mm,
right? And it sets off a completely different set of incentives and behaviors. Like I use this example of the number of messages I received from strangers, right? There was a point in time in my career on LinkedIn where it was probably two recruiters that I heard from for every salesperson, which is a good ratio. That means that, like, hey, there's opportunities out there. I might get a job. Now I probably receive a sales pitch 99 times for every recruiter I hear from, right? And so the dynamics have changed. And eventually, it may not kill LinkedIn today, but it's going to kill it 10 years from now or over the next 10 years. And I think it's their fault. And that's the thing I have a problem with, is that's
yeah,
what I would call the social mediaification
yeah,
of the platform. I used to not even consider LinkedIn to be social media. It absolutely is now. I wish it
right,
wasn't. I wish it would go back to what it was like, because it used to be the coolest place to get educational information. And I mean the coolest. Because I used to be on social media. So I had all the other like avenues for getting that information. And LinkedIn was far and above where the highest quality content was, right? And I wanted to be a part of that. And now that kind of content gets penalized for the most part. So I don't know. It'll catch up to him someday. And I'm done with my, opinions on LinkedIn.
I was gonna say, I think a lot of people who do use LinkedIn or use LinkedIn more often back then and even use it now, they would probably echo what you just said. It's turned into
Yep.
a social media platform versus a platform what it was built for. So
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of drifting away from its mission and what's actually
Sure.
valuable.
Well, and the thing is, there's nowhere to replicate it, or at least it doesn't exist now,
Yeah,
because, like, again, the TikTokification of the world, right? Like, is that ever going to
no,
usurp the level of the quality of content I used to get on LinkedIn? It's not even close,
yeah.
right? Like, I don't know. And there's a lot of people who I loved and respected that are on there that you just almost never hear from now because the algorithm.
I still feel like I do that because people that I used to follow or see their content more often, now it's just kind of disappearing in the echo
Mm-hmm.
chamber. So you barely
Yep.
see it unless you go on their profile and you're like, oh, I haven't seen their post in a while. And you
And
go on
that's
their
not an accident.
profile.
It's
Yeah,
not an accident,
yeah.
because and yeah, it's very, very frustrating.
Anyway, apart from LinkedIn,
Yeah.
I know that you mentor a lot of people. And I'm curious to know what are some themes that you've noticed that people are holding on to certain things that hold them back in their career, in their personal life, and something that really stood out to you.
this is a tough question because it's I don't think that like the only theme I think I've noticed is there's not a theme. It's very random.
Yeah.
And like
Okay.
and the thing I would say is everybody's kind of living their life in their own life stage, and that's
Mm,
beautiful. And so my big thing is what I try to do is I try to meet them where they're at, sincerely and authentically get to know them as a human being and then as a professional, and then see if there's any way I can help. And a lot of times there isn't, and that's
mm,
fine, you know?
yeah.
But if there is, I mean, and I like them a lot because like some of them I don't like, frankly, because like they're just like, oh, this is not what
Yeah.
I thought it was gonna be.
Yeah.
Um,
Funny.
but like if I like them, I always like you kind of get a like I will talk to you forever. Like you have to quit talking to me if we've got a relationship. And no, because I some this actually kicks some people off. That idea is like, look, I'm never gonna reach out to you. You got to find me.
Oh my
But
God.
if you
Yeah.
reach out to me, I will always respond. I will
Yeah.
always be there for you, whatever. It's just this is kind of a, mentor protege relationship, and I'm not getting mentoring from you, so I don't really need to reach out.
I like that. And you've mentioned that to me too, because
I
you
have.
asked me to reach out more often. And yeah, I learned that. In terms of true mentoring, what's something that you've learned about yourself?
I don't know. I'd like to think I knew all this stuff already. I probably didn't, but it's like what you learn a lot about. Even though I'm trying to help other people, I learn about what I'm good at, but also my own personal failings. And like some people, and this is gonna sound mean. I really don't mean it in a mean way. Is like some people are boring, and like I need to be better at being an active listener, right? And like things like that. It's like, okay, this is not their fault, Like I need to do better. Um, but I'd say for the most part, it's like, and one of the things I learned, it's just like, and I'd say I didn't learn, but I'd say reinforce is just how much I really like cool people. I like humanity. I like meeting perfect strangers that we find that we have things in common. Like I like that. I like it a lot.
It goes back to your point where you prefer having human connection over AI connections, even though some
Yeah.
humans may frustrate you.
It's like imagine if you had to start mentoring algorithms. God, that would suck.
I think you might already be doing that.
Well, yeah, in a way.
Yeah.
No,
I
that's
was gonna say, I
depressing.
think every time I have a conversation with someone, my phone starts recommending something similar to the conversation that I just had. So I have to be very careful about the things that I talk about.
Yeah. I mean, that's probably the biggest issue I have with social media in general, again, is like the whole
Hmm.
concept of like if you're not paying for the product, you are the product, right? So we are the self-training algorithms for the social media algorithms. And yeah,
You have to be very
it's
mindful.
yeah, it's stupid.
I don't even think we're gonna come out of that. I feel like it's just gonna get worse and worse.
Well, it's a system, it's a complex. Scott and I were actually talking about this on the podcast earlier. Is one of the things about complex systems is no one person controls it. And because no one person controls it, it's very hard to change, and it's high variance. And there's emergent properties of it. Here's an emergent property of social media, at least like the previous iterations, was there were outrage machines. They didn't realize it. They thought that these algorithms, like reinforcement learning algorithms, would get people to engage more and make more friends and do all this kind of stuff. But what it found is it rewarded polarizing and outrageous posts, and those would get the most amplification. So if you wanted to become, famous, you would just write something really terrible, and
Yeah,
then you would become famous. And then that
yeah,
got rewarded. And so then other people copied those people. And so then things got more polarized. Well, then because things are more polarized, people are like, oh, that's no big deal. That's just online. Real life isn't like that. And then it started spilling over into real life, right? These are all emergent properties of complex systems. Well, guess what? It didn't have to be that way. And so the only thing that I could see, again, as a human being and trying to be an active agent in my own life, is I have to remove myself from the equation, right? Because in a complex system, no one actor can change the system. And so if I can't change the system from within, I need to remove myself from the system.
I know because you said you stopped using social media about 4 years ago. So do you see a
Hmm.
notice in like how you move, how you behave, how you
I
think?
noticed it in other people actually. I mean, I noticed in myself, I just feel better, but that was a long time ago. All like that diminishes. You just go back to kind of being a normal human being then, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But I've been that way for a while. The thing is, I noticed in other people is like I can see when somebody's been programmed. They don't see it in
Mm.
themselves. But it's like people that get like really upset about something that's not upsetting. Like,
Mm.
yo, you need to chill out. Like you're way too online. Like,
Can you give
we're
me an
good.
example?
Uh, I think I'll say I heard somebody say this term the other day, and I think it stuck with me. Is like I'm not a precious person, and what I mean by that is like a really precious person is somebody who like lets everything in the world offend them for whatever reason,
Mm.
right? And it's like those are people that are just highly online. They're highly in these like echo chambers. Everything is bad. You know, anything you
Yeah.
say is bad. You breathed wrong. Okay, it's bad. Well, it's like I'm just not precious, and so
Yeah.
like I don't have to deal with that.
I have a fun little bit that someone recommended to add, and I really liked it. It's going
You
to
gonna
be
try it out on
called,
me?
I am going to be testing. You're going to be the first test subject, so we'll see. I debated between it being quote unquote professional or just some random things that I just ask you, but we'll do a little bit of both. So, rapid fire, this is what it's going to be called. And I wanted to ask you a very controversial opinion
Oh
because you
God.
work in a people analytics space. But if you don't want to
I'm
answer it, you can just plead the fifth.
gonna say pass.
You can just say pass and we'll move on to the next one. Yes, pass is an
Yeah.
option, but only you can only use it once. And this might be it.
I
Remote
can use
work
as many
or
times as I want. I'm
just
not
once
getting
though.
fired for coming on your podcast.
Oh, I don't think you'll get fired. I think you'll be fine. The first question is remote work or in-person work?
I mean, this isn't hard. It's probably not as quick an answer as you're looking for, but just because I've been remote for 3 years now, I am
Yeah.
craving some in person. And you know
Mm,
this, like most of the people I work with are like really far away, so I almost
yeah.
never get to see them in person. So I am very much craving in person. But I'm not, what I'm not craving is going into an office 5 days a week from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., all that kind of stuff, which is what's traditionally kind of connoted with in person. But I personally, I'm craving that, recently.
Yeah. You think it'd be better? I guess I'm gonna go on a tangent. So sounds like it's more of like a hybrid environment, but less structured. Like
I
you
just think I
don't,
want human connection. Like that's what
yeah.
I'm looking for. And you can only
Hmm.
get it at an arm's length when you're always virtual.
So true. Yeah. I think I feel that too every time I've joined a new company or worked remotely. Just a tiny bit
Yeah.
of human connection. Okay, less professional. Human superpower that you could have, what would it be?
Like a real superpower, like a one in like a
Any,
comic book.
yeah, anything that you can think of.
I
It could be
sort of mean this
couple.
I kind of mean this ironically, but like,
Okay.
what if anything you touch turned to money? You know, that would
That's
be
that,
cool.
I don't think I've ever heard that being a superpower, but I like that actually.
Yeah.
It's a blessing in disguise.
As long as you could turn it on and off, like you don't
Okay.
literally want to turn everything into money. That seems
Yeah.
like a curse.
Yeah. Blessing in disguise. What's one habit that you implemented that has contributed to your success?
I mean, this is on and off, but I started running in the mornings. That helps.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it just makes me more chill. When I haven't exercised in a few days, I'm much more irritable. I notice it. And I used to not notice it, and now I can notice it. And it's like, okay, this is this isn't somebody else annoying me. This is just I need to get my hormones in whack.
It's just you need to take out the energy in one way or another.
Hmm.
And the next question is something that you've shared throughout the podcast too, but your all-time favorite quote. It could be the same one or it could be something different.
Yeah. I haven't shared this one, but I probably could have because it's related. Is genius is the fire that lights itself. I don't really care about the genius part of it. I love the concept of be the fire that lights itself.
Hmm.
Right?
Self, yeah, self-sufficient. Is that the right word?
I think it's more than that. I think it's like, and I put this in an article not that long ago. I think you saw it, like, be unstoppable, right?
Mhm.
Right. If
And
you're the
betting on
fire that lights
yourself.
itself, nobody can put out your fire.
That's so true. Don't let someone else dim your power, dim your
Yeah. And even
light.
if they do put it out, you light it again because
Yeah.
you're the fire.
Yeah. What's something that you wish you knew sooner or did sooner, but did not because of fear?
Yeah. It's like, if you put yourself out there, people are going to be cool, not mean.
Don't mean, but you just learn how to deal with it or ignore
Well,
it.
I'd say percentage wise, it's like almost 99% niceness.
Yeah.
Of course, I'm not out there like saying like crazy stuff too. So
Yeah.
that helps.
What's one piece of advice you would give to your younger self or just someone early in their career?
Find your icky guy. It's four things combined. It's like what you're passionate about, what the world needs, what you can get paid for, and what you're good at. I'm actually impressed I remembered that. Um, but if you combine those four things together, that's the concept of ikigai. And that's yeah, do that. So a lot of people say follow your passion. Well, that's only one of the four,
Mm-hmm.
right? You need all four.
To find it. Or are
Mhm.
you still searching?
Uh, I'd say the what the world needs category is constantly changing. And so
That's
you
true.
have to change with as the world changes too. So you can find it and then lose it again. And not necessarily because you've lost any of your passion or any of your skills, it's just the world has changed. And therefore it's fundamentally a dynamic journey.
Me of how people say, or at least I bought into the concept of always having a North Star, but what you're describing, and correct me if I misunderstood, it's like your North Star might change with time.
Yeah. And there are
Hmm.
people that had their ikigai as like, horse and buggy, drivers.
Yeah.
They still exist. There's just much fewer of them. What the world needed changed. And therefore they probably had to learn how to become cab
Adapt.
drivers instead of being horse and buggy drivers.
Adapt with time.
Yeah.
Well, that's all the questions that we had for rapid fire. But one last question before we wrap up is anything else that you'd like to share with the audience that I didn't ask or that we didn't get to touch on?
No, I think I've shared more personal stuff on here than I've shared in all of my podcasts combined. So
Ah, I
good
feel
job,
honored.
first
Thank
of
you.
all. Um, but second of all, I think this has been a lot of fun. And I'll say this, I said it the last podcast I did with you, but the thing I'm proud of you about, Sonali, and why I think people should keep listening to you is because you are embodying this of being the woman in the arena, being the person who's betting on themselves, being the one who's putting themselves out there even when it is very uncomfortable and it's crazy and it's fearful. And so I'm proud of you. Good job.
I was really hoping that I'd be more prepared this time, just in case if you did this, because last episode you did it and that really caught me off guard and I didn't know how to react. So in the beginning, I made you feel uncomfortable by giving you a compliment, and now I'm feeling uncomfortable by you giving me a compliment. And I think the sun's hitting perfectly right too, because I'm just disappearing into the background.
Yeah, you are.
But now I really appreciate you coming here and even agreeing to doing this podcast and sharing so much about yourself and your journey and opening up more.
Yeah,
So thank
absolutely.
you.
I'll see you
Thanks,
around, girl.
Paul. Take
Bye.
care.